Greetings, everybody, to another episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick, where we talk about thoughts, feelings, and emotions associated with everything that life has to throw at us. So my name is Brian.
And I'm Patrick.
And Patrick, there's a fabulous new documentary on Netflix. It's called The Social Dilemma. And now before we really talk about what The Social Dilemma is, do you remember Facebook when it first started?
Absolutely. Who doesn't, right?
Right? And even before Facebook, there was MySpace. You remember Tom? Our first friend was Tom, right? And I remember when I first got on, let's say, MySpace or Facebook, the very, very beginnings of social media, it was a nice little platform to just share our pictures, like what we were doing. Because I don't know if most of the people here right now know what it was like when Facebook or MySpace first started, right? Like, it was for me to I like taking pictures. I'm just going to put this online and show you guys what I'm doing. That's what it was, right? Now, right? So
yeah, it was kind of this happy. We had this euphoria. We had this happy moments of Facebook, and you were on MySpace. I wasn't as much, but the idea that we could stay in touch with people who were distant from us, online, and share what's going on in our lives, because we connected with them, let's say at college or originally for university, and then we got in touch with our old high school friends where we just knew them, and we were friends with them, but we weren't super close or we lost touch. And then you got family members that you can kind of just be around and know what they're doing. That was what I would say is the golden age of Facebook already. The launch was it, the launch was the golden age.
Because do you remember Facebook before it was Facebook now? In order for you to have a Facebook account, what did we need to have as a primary criteria? Do you remember?
You needed a .edu, which basically meant you went to a university or a college.
That's right. And so I remember the first time that I actually used Facebook was when I actually applied to Cal Poly Pomona. And this was after I finished my associate's degree at Pasadena City College. We're like, you know what? I'm going to create a Facebook account because I have an EDU. You have to have an EDU account. And what
it was a rite of passage, right? And
right?
We were so proud of it. We were proud of our profiles, to say the least. And it was great.
It was great, and it was a way for me to let's say connect with future prospective students of Cal Poly Pomona. It's like, hey guys, my name is. It was very simple at the time, right? You look for people who are very similar in, let's say, your degree, what class you're planning on graduating with, and that was it, right? And before that, we never even had smartphones. We had MySpace and Facebook on our computers.
Yeah, that's true. And we were growing up and internet speeds were getting faster. And by the way, I got to make a quick shout out to Cal Poly Pomona. That's where we got our roots. You and I connected. I got my bachelor's and my master's from there. So super proud alumni, for Cal Poly Pomona. But that EDU was a gateway. And I think the significance of just being able to connect with like-minded people was really helpful. We knew it was people who were kind of in that academic setting. We knew it was people who were involved in some way or another and engaging. And I think that was a really great start. And that's probably why Facebook just grew so exponentially the way that it did. But, then we watched The Social Dilemma and glass shattered, man. It threw me off. I was watching it and I was like, oh my goodness. Is this what it is now? The AI and the algorithms. I mean, what was your reaction when you just kind of were watching the entire documentary, kind of bits by bits?
For those of our audience members who listen to our podcast, we highly recommend watching The Social Dilemma because it really talks about just the harmful sides of social media. Now, granted, we all know how much social media already influences people. Let's say, they've had studies where people who are on social media periodically are high risk of depression, high risk of anxiety, and other things, right? Let's take an example in the episode from The Social Dilemma, where it talks about how the generation these days have so much of their values associated with how much likes you have, how much thumbs up you have, right? And Patrick, I'll be honest, I don't use Facebook that often. Are you a Facebook user at all?
I am. I gotta say, I try to. I'm on I don't know how, I don't know what the scale is of if you're a power user and that stuff, but I use it enough. I scroll through it. I keep it open a couple times a day. And so I would say I'm on it pretty frequently. Whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram on and off. And so I am active on it in what would be considered active. I'm not posting regularly, but I am scrolling, and so it's kind of a difference. I don't know how the AI would classify me, because as we learned, AIs are just powering and creating profiles, our own user profiles, and they know so much about us. It's insane.
It is insane, and I just want to reiterate, for example, like. There's one reason why I don't like using Facebook and social media. And the number one reason, at least for myself, is honestly, it makes me feel worse.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And we learn why, because especially in the way that they describe it, which I think is true, any sort of fear-based message or fear-based content or slightly kind of controversial that is antagonistic it creates this emotional response out of us, and usually it's some sort of negative emotional response, and that has a profound effect just even on our inner selves, and that's what you're picking up on. But the algorithm right now doesn't know, good or bad or positive or not, or fear-based or not. It just knows what's getting more likes, what's getting more impressions, and it sees that this content is doing well. So it just feeds you more of that, more and more and more. There's also like comparison bias, where we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people and what they post. So that's a really big issue. Yeah, and kind of you and I have been talking about it offline, but I think it's great to bring up is one of the reasons that I think I felt it too, Brian. Like, we constantly compare ourselves to what we see on social media, and almost all the time, it's like we're not doing enough. We're not enough. We're not good enough. Man, those people have it better than me. And those people, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. So I do want to talk about that AI part in a second, but that's the whole part of like why I feel bad. For example, is like I see you look like you're having a great time with your family, or you're hanging out with your friends. Here I am just sitting at home like doing nothing, and that makes me feel bad. So going back to what you're saying, comparison, right? You're having a great time. You're on vacation at Hawaii. I'm just at home, like being a loser. And this is the problem with, I think, a lot of people's mindset, where it's like they're constantly comparing how Sam is going to the beaches in Honolulu, Lisa is here in Lake Tahoe. It's like it's constantly just too much.
But yeah, the comparison trap is really something that is so hard to get ourselves out of, especially when you have social media in your face constantly reminding you, 5, 6, 7 times a day, multiply that by however many platforms you're on, of how you are not doing as much as other people. You are not performing as much, you're not making enough money, you're not looking good enough, you're not exploring enough, whatever it is. And I think a big reason for us in our podcast is when we get those feelings, what do we do about it? And it's a really good reason to start to look inside of ourselves, and that introspection aspect of understanding, is it important to us or not? But there's so much to unpack on this documentary. It kind of just blew my mind. What else was there, Brian, that you were watching? You're like, what the heck?
So if you don't mind, I do want to stay on this topic on Facebook, for example, or just the whole idea of the social media, okay? We'll go with the other details later. And there is a correlation, right? We all know that how ever since social media has started, there has been a steady incline towards like increased anxiety, increased depression. And going back to what you're saying, comparison trap. But the other thing is the whole concept of addiction, right? like we all know how social media is addicting. Like I need to see, oh, you tagged me, Patrick. I need to see what you tagged me in. Oh, there's an anniversary coming up that we did this thing last year. Facebook gives you those stupid notifications. Like I never considered myself to be an addictive type of personality. At least I hope not. But at the same time, I catch myself like, God, I gotta grab my phone, hit that refresh. But like what do you do in this situation where, like, how do you fight off that addiction? Like, tell us about it.
So we should actually start with what the people that were being interviewed. These were some of the early creators of social media, and they all say turn off your notifications. And I think that's a really good first step. The other thing about recognizing that it's an addiction, because I recognized it too. I had to basically stop my social media usage just because I realized how much time it was taking out of me, but also the despair, the state of despair that I was constantly in. And when you look at it as an addiction, you have to acknowledge it and you have to get control of it every single day. Every single day is a battle with social media on your phone. And, let's be clear, what the documentary pointed out was when social media became kind of apps on our cell phones, that's when we saw spikes in, physical abuse for mental health issues, suicide rates among young girls. But that was profound. And when I look at it, I do agree it's so addicting, and the way that they program it is to be able to elicit dopamine responses or like just chemical responses inside your brain. So, it is extremely powerful, which means every day you have to decide how much time and how much control you're going to have over your social media. That is extremely hard. I mean, ask anyone that has an addiction with anything. Every day, just overcoming that one addiction is hard enough, but now you got to overcome 6 different apps on your phone, right? Like it's crazy because someone can go from being addicted to alcohol, drugs, and then you add on social media and you tell them each one of those is addicting, or you are addicted to each one of those apps. So now they have
I'm not
4 or 5 addictions.
What are you talking about? No.
Right. But like I've had to delete my Instagram, just take it off my phone and live without it for a while. And it was really good. So I think if anything else, everyone should watch our video and then go on a social media break until our next episode. But that's a whole different thing. But yeah, the addiction is so real. And I think if you realize you're addicted to social media, you need to approach it like any other addiction. Every single day, you have to decide whether or not you're going to be fighting that social media addiction or not, right? Like, I don't know. That's what it means to me, man. Like that was profound to me. I was watching this and I was like glass break.
I have one real important question for you, okay? This is an important one. You ready?
Okay.
How did it feel when I went to Switzerland? You saw those pictures of Switzerland. That make you feel good?
No. Are you kidding me? Like, okay, so for people that don't realize, Brian thinks that, he envies my life and sometimes I envy his life. And I think my wife envied your life world traveling a lot more than me. But Brian was traveling the world. He was in Switzerland. He was snowboarding more than I was. And I'm at home literally like comparing myself. But in reality, I was getting married. I was having a kid and I was enjoying that, but different times of the day when I'm looking at it, I was either really, really annoyed. Man, maybe I should have waited to have a kid, and then make it more about me. All sorts of things were going on in my mind. Like, it was crazy. And it got to the point where I had to stop. And I had to remember and just be like, I am just happy for my brother Brian. He's out exploring the world, riding on elephants, and Lord knows eating what. And I should be happy with what I have, and I should be happy that he's experiencing that. And then that kind of helped break the cycle. But for a while, man, I I threw my phone every time I saw your picture. I was like, oh, you bastard, like I hate you, right? Like that
I actually like that.
sucks.
I like that response actually, but you brought it back. It's not about like what I couldn't have, but actually what I have now. It's that whole concept of gratitude, right? So I just want to see a reaction, but it's funny. It's funny when you bring that up actually, because I know a lot of people right now who like to go quote travel just so they could take pictures and show off. Like, hey guys, here I am in France. Here I am at the Louvre. How do I pronounce it? It's like people like to go places just to show off now. And I remember this was like 2 or 3 years ago. I was reading an article. I forget if it was either New York Times or LA Times, where people travel mostly just to take pictures at this point. And it's fascinating. Like, why don't you actually go and enjoy what you're doing rather than like, doing the selfie and taking your picture? It's fascinating to me now.
Yeah, you can't even enjoy anything because you're so worried about what the perfect shot is, It also doesn't help when the new phones kind of tell you, here's the best shot. Like, if you point your camera right here, that's the best shot. Like, that's what my phone does now. So much of our lives is consumed by that. And I think this is, bringing it back to the documentary, The Social Dilemma, it was never intended that this is how it, would end up. No one who created it early on, I acknowledge them. They created something that they thought would be positive, a force for good. And they didn't realize, they didn't even imagine it would become what it is today. But I think what I started to glean from that was everyone changing their values and their value system and where they get affirmation for what they do good in their lives based on responses and comments and the interactions from social media, right? Which is really what's affecting all of our teenage girls right now. And that's why they have exponentially increased their suicide rates, because their entire world of how they view themselves is defined by social media, which is mind-blowing to me. And it's hard for me to imagine, especially being a guy, right? I don't even know. I'm not even trying to mansplain this. And, I'm pretty courageous. I'll try to mansplain stuff. But this is no way, because, Brian, you and I, we have no idea what the pressure is for a teenage girl who uses social media as a way to be able to be affirmed that what, she's pretty or she's good or, she is someone that people love, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. So let's just kind of go back to how we were like growing up, right? So before you guys all okay boomer us, we grew up without cell phones. The first cell phone that we had was that brick Nokia phone, with the gay had a snake on it, and that was pretty much it. You sent text. And honestly, I can't imagine going to like middle school or high school with the way life is right now, right? Where we're essentially judged by how many friends we have or how many likes we have on our pictures. And like, let's say, we didn't get invited to this party that this other person in class threw. It's like, it's hard. That would be hard for me, honestly. I'd be really depressed. Not gonna lie.
I wouldn't know what to do. Like, I think I would have been a priest or something. I'm like, dude, this is way too much. I'm just gonna go and pray or something and read it. Leave me alone. And what I started to think about afterwards, after watching the documentary, I was thinking about that. I'm like, because I was thinking about my daughter and what do I need to do to prepare her? The one thing that I think relates a lot to our podcast is we need to help the children and all children and generally people figure out their self-worth and their value to themselves, for themselves, so that they can start sharing that with the world. When you don't know, really what makes you you and what are the good things about you that you accept, it's one thing to have someone say, oh, you're so smart, or oh, you're so pretty. But if you don't accept it, then it doesn't mean anything. It's quite superfluous, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You have a teenage girl that's depressed and doesn't like the way that they look. No matter how many times you tell her she's pretty and she's a beautiful young woman, she's not going to accept it. And if she doesn't, then it just perpetuates that negativity that comes from social media. So I started realizing, oh shoot, like I have to prepare my daughter sooner rather than later on how to accept who and what she is beautiful. And I think that's something that we all need to do from time to time and to keep hold in ourselves. But like, I gotta ask you, Brian, like when you're watching that and you're realizing how much it just is based on image, or it's based on impressions and likes, and what the AI algorithm is doing, like from your perspective, where you've kind of had your ups and downs figuring yourself out, like what did it mean? How much were you influenced by social media or not, kind of in your introspection journey?
One of the interesting things, Pat, like, okay, let's talk about, like, for example, this podcast where you talk about validation and all of that. It's hard to find a fine balance, because let's say, for example, one of the reasons why we do this is because we want to share our experiences. We want to share just what's going on in hopes that other people have some, again, introspection, right? Learning about what it is about yourself so you could essentially be a better human being. And the pros, right? We're doing this to kind of essentially help other people. Now, the downside of all this is if we don't get enough of those clicks, we don't get enough of those impressions, those likes, do you still want to keep going? Right? Because that's what's like, and that's the hard part for me. And anything, right? A lot of the things that we do, we want to be acknowledged for the things that we do, the things that we produce, and honestly, it's tough. We want to feel validated for the things that we do, but if we're not getting the results, what do we do? Do we just say, you know what, maybe this is like you know what I mean? And this is what social media is very important. So it's like, tell us, like, what do you think?
It's crazy because if you think about how we're going to promote ourselves, it's all on social media. So there's like this double-edged sword that you and I and every other podcaster is out there dealing with and grappling with, where they know some of this could be harmful, but hopefully you have a message of positivity, and hopefully this can feed the algorithms more, right? So if all the content was just positive content, then hey, maybe we'll get some positivity and some decreases in some of those suicide rates, or the physical harm, or mental health issues and things like that. But I think, Brian, it'd be really interesting to the people listening to us, like understanding what effect does it have either getting it or not getting it, like almost on video by video for you, because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. You're talking about how like we need that affirmation. You literally have gone through it with your multiple channels, right? Like, so expand on that a little bit, because I think that relates directly to the impact, right? So
for those of you who don't know, I have another YouTube channel that I kind of started. I essentially have 3 YouTube channels now. Okay, the first one was like an example, like let's just try it out and see. I didn't really like where it was going, so I created another channel where I'm like, oh, I think I have an idea of where I want to go. So let's talk about that one. The hardest thing to keep going, Pat, I'm not going to lie, is the fact that you're not getting enough clicks, you're not getting enough watch time, you're not getting enough thumbs up, okay? Like, for example, before we started this podcast, I used to do a video almost every day, and I spent pretty much like 2 or 3 hours a day making these videos, all right? And you're putting that much effort to creating something that I thought that I won't say I thought I enjoyed, because I do enjoy it, but at the same time, again, going back to that validation, if I'm not getting the acknowledgement, the validation, the thumbs up, the subscribers, the views, at some point, you kind of feel like, is it worth it?
yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie, there are times where I just like, should I just quit? Not gonna lie, it sucks, dude, that the fact that the things that I enjoy doing, the creativity outlet of it, is basically validated by other people's views.
Yeah. And it's so hard. I mean, like when we, even for our channel and our podcast, and trying to get that and get, really get that out there, and be a positive message. It's hard when we're not social media influencers. Brandon and I don't have hundreds, even thousands of people following us. We're barely just kind of just run of the mill, normal people, I would say in this case. Now you take that concept and even, what we're struggling, and you magnify that by like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 for all the teenagers in school that are out there that literally this is all they live for. it makes me sad. Honestly, it doesn't feel like we as a society should pressure them that. And but you can't escape it. So I think we need to start to understand how we help them, how we help each other, and what does it mean? How do we control social media in a sense? How do we limit it? Is it just cold turkey, or do you do something small like turn off notifications? But I think it's also realizing the documentary did one thing for me. It did a number of things, but like the one key thing it did for me was explain their business model. And when it explained their business model, it gave me ideas as to, okay, that's the reason why with this app, I feel this way. With that app, I realized this. With that app, I did. So that's where it came internalized. And for those of you that haven't watched it or watched it, you're kind of like, well, what do you mean? Their business model really depends not on our data, not on gathering our data. So our data by itself is just not that valuable. But our patterns and what we like and what we don't like, what we spend time looking at, every photo that we spend a nanosecond, a millisecond looking at, it records that, it tracks that, and then it looks for similar pictures. So they have built a business model being able to sell us anything they want to, which is a gold mine for advertisers. And it was something that was said in the documentary. We are the product. We are what's being sold. Everything that we do online is being tracked so that it can be sold. And when I realized that, and I started thinking about it, Brian, I was like, wait a minute. That means what I've been seeing, what I've been feeling, there's an element of manipulation behind it. So it might be true in the sense that I was interested in this topic or I was looking for something and great. But it was also, mostly manipulation, which made me feel kind of dirty. I think is the way. Like when you saw that during the documentary, Brian, what went through your head, man? Like the fact that they were profiting off manipulating us.
Bro, Google, you ain't profiting off me, okay? Facebook, I don't use Facebook. So actually, it's such an interesting thing you talk about this manipulation. And I know subconsciously most people actually don't realize this. So I want you to paint a picture, okay? Let's say you're a blank profile. You're a blank state. You haven't signed up for any of these social medias. You have no Google account. You have no Facebook, no Instagram, okay? The minute you log on, let's say you're a new user, you start. All of a sudden, you like cat photos, right? We all love cat videos, cat memes, and all that. All of a sudden, it's going to start building a profile for you for these little images of cats or things that are associated with cats, right? All of a sudden, I like Los Angeles Lakers, okay? Playoffs are starting next week. It's going to start introducing you to all of these things to get you essentially to start clicking more and more and more. And actually, I want to remember, so Facebook, again, going back to Facebook, you might not remember this. Facebook now has an infinite scroll system, right? You could just keep scrolling down and down and down and down.
It's horrible. I hate it.
Yeah,
I hate infinite scroll.
So the people who designed that, it's interesting. I never knew this was an actual field, like psychology of addiction or something, how to get people to do things that you want. Psychology of persuasion, I think that's what the classes call it in Stanford. I forget, but it's amazing because
they nudge you into doing what they want you to do.
Essentially, right? Because again, going back to how Facebook was like for us, I know you don't remember this. You had to actually click page 1, page 2, page 3. That extra click, that delay, makes it less usable. But the fact that you could just infinitely scroll and scroll and scroll, hit refresh, see what something new comes up. It's addicting, right? Let's face it, we all have ADHD at this point. We like to see constantly new feeds of either Reddit, Google News, Facebook, Instagram. Everything has to be new.
And it's trained behavior that they brought into the code, right? So change behavior is one, change your behavior, then train you of how they want you to use your platform so that they can, again, manipulate and change you again. And then, on top of that, introduce content just to keep you on. So the more time you spend on the app, the better. So they have to constantly feed you new content that they see other users really liking, or they know that your friends are doing something, so that you always get these notifications. So and so, posted a story on Instagram, and okay, what was it?
You got tagged.
You got tagged, even if you didn't get tagged, right? Like, oh, there's some interesting things going on with climate change, with electric vehicles and things like that, right? Like, it's out of control. And the documentary will give credit to the people who were the early creators that were being interviewed. They do a very good job explaining this when you sit down and watch it. And we're not bashing on them, just in case anyone is wondering, but we're just literally, it caused visceral reactions, at least from me, to realize, wow, I need to make sure my decisions, my thoughts, my values are being represented in everything I do, not the other way around. What I mean by that is, I want to make sure if I go and buy something, it's because I really want that thing, not because I was manipulated into seeing something that I might like or that I sort of like, and it matches my profile and things like that. So it's causing me to reflect on what are the important things that I need in my life, and that includes how much time I spend on social media. But as I mentioned in Double-Edged Sword, like, how do you promote a podcast? Social media. That's the answer.
So let me ask you, Pat. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you. You say you try your best not to. How do you know you're not being manipulated? How do you really know?
I think it needs to come down to understanding decision-making process in our head. And for everything that we do, whether it's, you buy a piece of furniture, you buy something that you think you need to have a process that's grounded in reality. And so asking yourself, do I need this? Do I use it every day? Am I going to use it? Not justify it. Because how many times have we made an impulse buy because of Amazon and because of recommended products or a review video that we saw that says, oh, this is like the best knives of 2020 or something. I was looking for kitchen knives, and all of a sudden I'm getting splattered with YouTube videos on like which kitchen knife is best. And I went down a rabbit hole, and I think I figured out one. But I stopped myself and I'm like, do I need a new kitchen knife right now? Like, am I really master chef material? I think not. Like, does it really matter how much weight there is in the grip for me? No. Do I need to spend another $200 on a kitchen knife? No. But the manipulation worked, Brian. I was this close to ordering a knife, and I convinced myself almost, so I had to stop it and be like, wait. How much cooking do I really do? Who uses this more? Like, my wife Lena is like, you don't really need to buy it right now. So she's kind of my gut check. So on the things that I think are, is this okay to buy? I ask her, and it's usually things that she's not really interested in. So she's my like reality check. The things that I'm interested in my feed, she isn't. So then she'll tell me, Patrick, we're not going to use that. Patrick, I don't need that. Okay, then I move on. And then vice versa. She's like, I saw this, do you think we need, oh, we absolutely don't need that. I mean, I don't think we need that, dear. If I said the first part, I'd be in a whole lot of trouble, but it's that type of, you need a reality check system. So whatever way you make decisions, it's gotta be rooted in some sort of reality check. And I don't know what that process is, but everyone figure it out right now, or else, every year you're going to go through crying after the holidays because of impulse buys, right? Like the whole lining up for Black Friday TVs. How many people really needed TVs? Right? Like,
it's funny. So the one thing that I've done lately, for the last year, I turned my phone on silent. No vibration, nothing, just completely do not disturb. That's why if you text me, I don't really hear it. I just check it later, but I'm still technically always on my phone or on my computer. And the other thing is I like to have no notifications. So I like to have I'm very pedantic that way, where I like to just clear everything right away. I don't like to see anything. I'm just weird that way. But there's actually a serious thing that I do want to talk, or we should actually talk about, Pat. So I never knew this actually. So Google, for example, based off your location, if I type something, I'm gonna get different results versus if you type the exact same thing. That is, so let's talk about the real nitty gritty for a second, how social media can really influence us in a negative way. So for example, we all know about politics. Republicans are bad, Democrats are good, or vice versa, depending again on what you follow, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Brian. And they talk about this a lot because I think the early social media creators, this is what scares them, if not the most, a lot, which is that truth is somehow like truth has a perspective, which makes no sense. Truth should just be truth.
But wait. So talking about truth, okay, because truth is such a subjective, but it's objective at the same time, right? I'm just gonna give you an example, Pat. You're in high school, you're in 6th grade. I'm the most popular kid in class, you're the new kid. If I convince everyone that you're a loser, but you're not, but I convince everyone that you're a loser, that's truth.
It's
right?
not,
so how do you
though.
define truth? But I convince everyone that it's truth. 29 people in the class, out of one person, which is you're the outcast, you're a loser, Pat, that's the truth. How do you solve that, bro?
And
right?
I don't know, right? I think what that shows though is they've taken that and they programmed it into everything online, Google, social media, whatever that is. So I think that's the real big risk that we have right now, which is if truth is relative, which is what we're getting at, depending on if you're one of the people that believe the cool kid in class or if you're a new person, if truth is relative, we can never literally grow or even do anything in the right direction. Everything's going to be as polarized that is now. And that's what they mentioned is going on right now. Truth being relative is breaking the fabric of society. And that's a really scary thought. Like
You'll be surprised though. That's the thing. Truth is relative, right? Until it's not. Because for example, COVID, all right? I believe it's real. I hope you believe it's real. There's a lot of people in our country who believe it's fake. How do you explain that?
What it is that they're really limiting what they believe and what they consider to be sources of truth, which is, I think, even worse because the sources of truth are starting to play the manipulation game. And it's one thing to be manipulated by advertisers, right? And buying stuff that, but it's another one like sources of truth, be it governments or politicians or even just, I'll say it, religious leaders. They start to use it as a tool. I think that becomes extremely dangerous, and we're seeing a lot of that now, right? And so there's definitive scientific proof. There's truths that we should hold that are even the truth that we all are human beings. That means we are equal. That means you're a human, I'm a human. No ifs, ands, or buts. And then you get into conversations where people are describing other people not as humans, but as money, as things less than human. And I thought we were past that as a country. So this is what's really worrying me. I don't know if I have a solution, Brian, to tell you the truth. Like this is just something that we have to empathize for the people who are supposedly listening to falsehoods and think that are true, that you need to find a way to connect with them on a human level.
But here's the thing, Pat. Here's the thing. So I get what you're saying. I really do. But the problem is, on their side, okay, let's look at the red. Or when I say red, I'm talking about the Republicans or Trump supporters. Now, this is hard, and I really don't mean to criticize and say, oh, Trump supporters are bad or Trump. But the problem is, you mentioned the rabbit hole, okay? They went down this specific rabbit hole. Now, all of a sudden, the Democrats, whatever they're doing is wrong, and whatever the Republican side is doing is right. going back to your truth question, how do you discern who is right versus who is wrong? Because what they're getting based off their news feed, based off their Facebook feed, their side is right, we're wrong. That's the problem.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's going on the flip side too, right? And it's just like painting all the Trump supporters as certain types of people, or like, you know, they all believe in like, you know, the flat Earth conspiracy and things like that. Before we even go down a rabbit hole ourselves, I think to really answer this is really where in some of our other videos we talk about when you're in that echo chamber, and until you come to the realization you need a way out, you need people around you that are going to be supportive, not online, in person, physically, being able to touch, being able to like connect with them at a human level, human to human interaction. That's what's going to save us. Literally, I think, as corny as it sounds, Brian, like loving one another as people is the only way we're going to combat the power of AI. Like, it sounds so corny, but I don't know any other way. It's not going to be won on Twitter wars. It's not going to be won on media wars. It's not going to be won online. It isn't. You know, you're just not going to win because the algorithms are faster. The AI can do things that we can't as human. So until you cut it off and until you connect with them on a whole different level, on the human level, you know, we can't fight a computer with computer, is what I'm saying. So you gotta fight a computer with human.
So can you clarify a little bit? So what do you mean? So if I'll take for example, I have a couple of patients who are, you know, they're older equals Republican, they support Trump. And I've had one patient where he's kind of like, dude, the Democrats are such losers, they're ruining our country. And it's hard for me to talk the politics with my patients because I follow the Democratic side. And so going back to your whole algorithm, right? So what are they watching that they believe so badly? And how do I connect with that person? Because changing someone's viewpoint is really hard, dude.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What it is that you, one, should talk mostly about things that you're comfortable speaking about. Let's do that. Let's stop talking about things that we have no idea about, that we are making assumptions about. The other thing that I think I saw Andrew Yang do this really effectively is that he had so many people across the spectrum, you know, every which way of the political spectrum, support his campaign. And I think it's because he was able to make sure that what he spoke about was directly relatable. So it wasn't immigrants taking our jobs. It's actually AI and robots, right? Manufacturing jobs didn't get replaced by a bunch of immigrants. It's actually robots that are taking manufacturing jobs. So whenever someone says, let's bring manufacturing jobs back, all it's really going to do is bring back a bunch of jobs for coders, for people who can run software on machines and troubleshoot that. They're not going to really bring people like what my dad used to do, which is work the assembly line, which is what people think when they hear manufacturing jobs. I think to connect with people, though, you have to dig a little deeper. And this goes into really relating to what we try to do in our podcast, which is you can't take something at the surface and make assumptions. So even if they say something, you can't respond assuming you know exactly how they mind things. I think we've gotten too far into the point where the sound bites elicit the expected reaction, and then you just keep going in that echo chamber. So the Democrat and the Republican talking points, right? Like distilling all of that into literally sound bites is just a sound bites going around and around, right? So you look at Twitter, you look at social media, all the arguments that are going on, the sound bites are the same, the messages are the same. It's crazy when you think of it that way. So I think what we need to do is dive deeper into what the actual problem is and then connect with people there. So don't do it at this level. If you have someone in your life and you're like, man, don't do it at this level. Don't assume and have empathy. That person might be really fed up with whatever they experienced. And they might have a really good reaction. They might have a really good reason for it. right? And there were a lot of people who are not happy with certain politicians, even though they're Democrats, because of what they did in their previous positions or what they did not do, right? So this, we can't approach it as if the arguments are going to win and change the person's behavior. If nothing else, I mean, for all the social media and coders and AI folks out there, if you can take someone that changed behavior knowledge and software knowledge to help, people come back to some element of reality and truth, that would be a big plus for the world. I think we would be in a lot better place as a society if they just did that, right? Like, just the new Google of positivity is blah, and this is where we bring you back from the rabbit hole. Like, someone should really develop this.
Yeah, no, I get it what you're saying, but again, what is truth? My truth and my reality is different from your truth and your reality. And that's the biggest problem right now with social media. Is I could program, if I was a very good programmer developer, I could convince you well enough based off social media influences to make you think a certain way, right? And honestly, that's the scariest part, is manipulation. People don't realize they're being manipulated. For example, you said something about sharing stuff on Facebook. Do you know how many people share something that has a headline for something that's completely unrelated to the topic, but is saying something else, right? Like, oh, here's a fire from Arizona, when in fact it wasn't recently. It was something that happened like 2 or 3 years ago, but they're sharing it anyways. Clickbait. Right? Without fact checking. That's what a lot of people do these days. You send me something, oh, I guess that's true. I'll send it to my friends. And that's what happens if something goes viral, and poof, you have some false narrative that means nothing, essentially, because no one decided to fact check this specific.
Not even that. It's just, they just read the headline and they're like, oh, I can't believe that. And then if you read the article, and then you go into the comments, and then they're like, did you even read the article? It doesn't matter if I read the article, right? And again, those comment sections are probably the same messages over and over. So is truth relative? No. I'll say that hands down. Truth is not relative. Truth shouldn't be relative, and truth is not in the real world, right? In social media, if you get nothing else from this, social media has made it where truth is relative. So think about that for a second internally as you're watching this episode. How can I exist in a world where truth is relative? And if that doesn't scare you and you're okay with that, then, that's a hard place to be in. But if you're kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, then really double check and understand that this is what social media is doing to us and how it's manipulating us. And not just us, but the people around us and other people we interact with. So again, to blame people who support certain politicians or parties or whatever that disagree with us or have gone down a rabbit hole or have a different relative truth, the last thing we should be doing is putting them in a box and blaming them and just yelling at them, right? It's the same way of approaching someone who is down, someone who is depressed, like, oh, you're a failure, you're amount to nothing. This is what we're doing to each other constantly on social media. And I think it's so unhealthy as a society, and we really need to get out of it. We really need to snap out of it, because it has gotten to a pretty intense state that we're in. But I have hope. I think we're at a breaking point. I think people are going to actually be able to break themselves out of social media. It seems very far-fetched. And if for no other reason than they're going to crave the human attention back. So if nothing else, like COVID is forcing them to separate, and then they're going to realize, man, this digital world sucks. I'm going to go back to my real life world and go talk to my neighbor who I think is on the other side of the fence, politically, personally, on a values level. But when they connect with their neighbor, they realize, hey, I actually like this person. So hopefully, I hope that saves us, man. You've been asking me for ideas. What is your idea of what's going to save us, man?
So Patrick, one of the most important things I think most people need to realize is this is the whole concept of like education, for example, right? Like, you know how we're, at least, again, I hate to bring politics into this, but how Democrats are trying to say higher education is really important. And one of the most important things that we all need to recognize is the concept of critical thinking, right? Don't just take something that you see on Facebook, on Google, on whatever, social media as face value and assuming that's the truth. If I see something, let's say that Biden did, right? Like, is that really true? It's sad to say I have to Google it though, but again, this is where I don't know if it's true anymore, where I guess if enough headlines, enough news outlets confirm that it's not true, then perhaps it's just fake news, right? I hate to use the word fake news, but one of the most important things is we have to start fact checking everything. We have to be able to essentially think for ourselves and not taught what to essentially think based off what you send me on Facebook, what I'm getting fed through, let's say, Reddit. So going back to your rabbit hole situation, is you have to be able to get ourselves out of it and know whether or not we are in a rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think just understanding what mental state we are in because of our social media use is probably the first step, regardless of what it is. And I'd push back a little bit on yours. The fact checking is great, but the higher ed comment, there's plenty of people. It's not so much higher ed that is needed, perhaps critical thinking, but maybe a bit more common sense. And at the same time, the difficulty with these manipulation and getting out of it is there's two things. One, fear-based messaging works. It's so much more effective because it elicits an emotional response. And the second thing is all the manipulations are based on somewhat of a truth. So there's one part of a truth and then it exploded outside of its context. And that's what's really going on, in my opinion. And so to even assume that people need to apply critical thinking, I think is not going to be something that is applicable to the masses. Most people are not college educated, or they're not even going to go to college. Most people are high school educated and they're trained and they have apprentice jobs and things like that. And so I think the responsibility rests on the people who provide these services, who provide the apps. There was that one scene where they say Saturday morning cartoons, certain advertisers were not allowed to advertise during Saturday morning cartoons because it was geared towards kids and children's programs. That should be how we approach certain type of content online, everything online, not just social media, just everything online. If you're going to be a news organization, and be it all digital, you got to be adhering to the same standards of news journalists or of children's content. And the YouTube Kids is not that. It's optimized for getting more watch time and likes and clicks, and really it's just watch time driving it. So what they do is they create videos that hook our children, and the children don't even like it. Whether or not they're learning something from it is a whole different question. They don't really like it, they just keep watching it. And that's the addiction that's starting at age 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I really think it's on the responsibility of the people who are going to provide access to the content. It's not good enough to say, well, we're not the content creators, we just aggregate. That's BS. Even in my day-to-day job, I screen how the message is sent. I screen the way it's being presented. I screen and at least filter what we should be really kind of talking about to a certain degree, just to make sure it's not something that is, again, a relative truth or something that's just optimized for clicks, optimized for watch time. I think those videos should just, be taken off of YouTube Kids. I have no idea what the value is for those videos. It makes me mad. It just really makes me mad. Let me pause there. Come back. Bring me back to reality. I went down another rabbit hole.
So I know what you were saying. Going back, you're saying that the content creators should take responsibility for it, right? But the problem is that's hard. Most of the people who create videos, for example, are driven through the likes, through the clicks, because most people want to get sponsored, affiliated, and eventually get paid to be, million subscribers. So we all know how much money YouTube makers, influencers can make. And sometimes we throw our values out the window, just so we can get these likes and these clicks. So I get what you're saying. It should be up to the responsibility of content creators to make good producing content or good content, but you can't control the masses, right? And going back to, again, introspection, if we can't control the masses, the best thing we can do is control ourselves, right? So going for you, for example, you're saying how you take the diligence to make sure that you're sending the appropriate email, sending the appropriate responses. Like, that's great that you do that, man, but a majority of people don't give a S. They don't give a crap. They just want the likes. They just want the reaction. We all know how popular that is, getting reactions, getting likes so that you can get paid, man.
Yeah. And, and I think that's really where, even growing as a leader in my industry and learning about leadership skills, the way it was taught to me of principled leadership, being a force for good, I think we just need to keep emphasizing that and just, going back to people's individual values. And like you said, to change the masses, you have to change ourselves. I'll bring in pop culture references. Michael Jackson said it. You look at it, Man in the Mirror, right? Tupac said it. You got to change yourself before you can, change others, and paraphrasing it. But there's so many stories and songs, and our artists are saying, if you want to change other people, you have to really start by changing yourself. And that's so true. And I think that's what we all need to do, is not wait for the masses. Don't wait for the social media companies. And I think that's one of the big driving motivational forces for me in this is, all right, if I want good positive content out there, I'm going to go to my good buddy Brian and we're going to make some good positive content, right? So that's kind of where I'm looking at it.
All right, so I know we've talked about a lot for this podcast, Pat. So I just want to just say, the most important thing that we all need to do is realize that our phones, they are addicting, and just like any addiction, we have to take control of it, right? Because essentially it does drive our mood, it drives our behavior. So again, if you feel like you're the type of person who is addicted to their cell phones, you have to constantly check what your friends are doing and just check the latest sales. My recommendation, at least personally, is set your phone on complete silence, no vibration, nothing, and just toss it, right? And the other thing is just the whole concept of mindfulness, right? Just being able to, I know you brought this up actually in our previous podcast, I think, and you said that we all need to just slow down, right? You said it great. If you could just repeat it, I'm probably saying it wrong, I'm butchering it, but you said that we all just need to slow down and just remember to just live in the now, live in the moment. And that's my recommendation. I know it's a lot, but I mean, any conclusions, bud?
Yeah, I would say acknowledge so there's two things I would say you need to acknowledge. The first one you mentioned, these are just addictive substances, and there's no other way to describe it. The other thing that you need to understand is that their business model relies on manipulating you, on changing your behavior, which means that has control over you. For me, I think it's take some of that control back, take some of that life back, for doing that. And one of the best ways to what you meant is slow down and enjoy the present. Don't go on the trips just for the pictures. Enjoy that moment, enjoy that hike without your phone, without getting the picture, without looking for, how many people go on hikes to look for the view that's going to get the most likes on their Instagram, right? And Brian does it. But at some point, turn it off and enjoy the moment and slow down. And I would say also for those that have children that are parents and you're worried about screen watch time, and it's crazy because before this documentary, in a previous video, I said, throw out the rule book and just let them watch a lot of screen time. And that was before I realized they were manipulating. I think for parents, as worried as we are, what we need to do is just be responsible for what they watch. And if what they're watching is okay with us and our values, not other people's opinions, not the number of reviews, not the number of of parents groups that recommend this particular video, not the education. But if it sits right with you, it's probably okay. And then you just let your children just watch those videos, and you don't let them watch the other ones. And then, you figure out the rest of it, the balance, how much time do they watch and things like that. But I would really, really like to see those physical harm rates go down, the suicide rates among young teenage girls go down. It's really sad when I think about it that way, because especially for women, they are such a bright light in the hope that we have as a society. So just kudos to all the women's and the working moms out there, and just any mom in general. But so my last point, Brian, and I know I kind of went on a little bit, my last point is really on an individual level, for everyone to really start the process of introspection if you haven't already. And if you're there, just go a little bit deeper. Find the values that define you. Find the actions that define you, and mimic and practice those positive actions, because that's really what's going to get you out of it. That's how you're going to stop the notifications. That's how you're going to, be able to delete the apps from your phone and just live your life, to the fullest. And so that, and a bunch of the reasons why Brian said, is the reason why we think you should subscribe and like our videos and follow us on social media, of course. But we hope you like the way that our videos are going and the positive messages that we're sending. So tune in next week for another episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick.
See you guys. Sorry, I act like the ending, but that's funny.